I decried the Harper administration's use of omnibus budget bills. It was appalling. And then time allocation over and over again, more than any previous government. And then the Liberals under Trudeau promised no more omnibus budget bills and no more time allocation. This moment, right now, is the worst I've seen in 15 years as an MP. And I feel that democracy itself is disrespected.
And as Parliament looks back at the last few months, the Green Party is looking ahead to their upcoming leadership vote. Longtime party leader Elizabeth May says she will step down in November when a new leader is chosen. Elizabeth May joins me now. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming on.
It's nice to see you. And of course, just a quick refresher for viewers that I announced in August that I was going to step down as soon as our leadership race is done. Now we have the date.
Now you have the date. You just announced. We'll get to that in a second, but let's start with the sitting. As we heard in that clip there, you were quite scathing of how the government pushed through some legislation at the end of this sitting. Time allocation to limit debate. We saw closure, of course. You said it's the worst you've ever seen. Tell me why you're so troubled by what the Liberals did this sitting, especially towards the end.
Well, the use of programming motions is something that, again, is much worse than I've seen in any previous administration. Programming motions meaning that the normal time that it takes to study bills is compressed with specific time limits. Like we're going to start at 9 a.m. and at 9:30 the committee will stop debating amendments and everything will be passed without debate. These programming motions, basically on top of time allocation in the House, programming motions in committee mean that important changes are not studied at all. And this last week, really regressive moves in terms of protecting human health and the environment from dangerous pesticides were rolled back with, and I'm not exaggerating here, JP, no study at all. No expert witnesses on health or environment, and only the Finance Committee reviewing these changes to pesticide regulation because it was in an omnibus budget bill, which meant the only committee studying it was Finance. So that's just a flavor of how bad it was, but I could go on because it was really bad.
Also, C-22, the lawful access bill, I know you were a foe of that one. I think you stood up in the House and said, we're going to let this go through with unanimous consent, but don't consider the Greens supportive of this, right? You were certainly opposed to it. We heard from the Liberal government on this, though. They say, listen, we need these new police powers, and committees reviewed this stuff for 25 hours, and there needs to be some new tools for law enforcement to help crack down on some crime that's difficult to police as it is right now. A lot of online activity kind of beyond the parameters of what police can access. They say they need to move quickly. They need to get these sort of things on the books. What do you say to them?
Well, they tried, it was a year ago, more than a year ago, they introduced C2 that included, and it was again about getting access. The first version of what the Liberals tried included that Canada Post could open our mail. That didn't go over well at all. This is again, JP, the weirdest legislative track I've ever seen on public policy, where they started with C2 that was so bad last June that it provoked, I think, about 300 or 400 civil society organizations, some dealing with privacy, dealing with refugee rights, dealing with civil liberties, and all saying no to C2. They then, in the fall, didn't withdraw C2, introduced C12, which was some of what was in C2, and then finally, this spring, they bring in the lawful access part, and you still have, although there are many, many improvements, so I'll say that, many improvements over C2 in terms of opening up our private information. That's what we're talking about. So privacy concerns, constitutional concerns, concerns whether our personal and private data will be available and accessible by foreign governments. There are real concerns that remain coming from constitutional law experts, civil liberties organizations, privacy concerns, including the privacy commissioner himself, and of course those who deal with tech issues, including tech companies, say we don't want to be holding on to this data. We don't want to have to build a surveillance architecture into the internet services that Canadians are used to using. I was very disappointed that it was bulldozed through. If we'd sat longer this summer, and I didn't hear any opposition parties saying we refuse to sit longer, but every single opposition party opposed C-22.
Yep.
So the Bloc, the Conservatives, the Greens, the NDP, I think that should have been a hint to the Liberals that we need to do some more work to get this right. Because when you pass legislation and you do it in a hurry, as you do it at your peril, particularly if it's going to be struck down in the courts.
Isn't this what majority governments do, though? I mean, Stephen Harper and the last Conservative government used time allocation and closure regularly. The Liberals control the House. They don't have to go cap in hand to the opposition parties anymore. They don't have to necessarily listen to what your complaints are. Isn't that just normal process in a majority government where they control Parliament?
It's just worse every time. So the seizing of power, the obscene growth in the power of the Prime Minister's office has been a problem since Pierre Trudeau invented the Prime Minister's office. It's not a constitutional reality. The Prime Minister is not supposed to be a powerful executive, but more or less, first among equals, and all those principles that are now more archaic than real, more they're in theory, not practice. But this was different, and it started with Bill C-5 last June, which was the Build Canada Strong, and using the King Henry VIII provision that if we, in passing this law, break other laws we've already passed, that's okay. We saw that same principle used again in the Budget Implementation Bill C-15, saying we can break laws because we have to, because we're in a hurry. This time around with Bill C-30, which was the Spring Economic Statement implementation, there was so much hidden in that omnibus bill. The Liberals stand up in the House, as you know, and say, we were elected to do these things. I defy any Liberal to find me any place in their election platform when they said they were going to roll back protections for the environment and human health from toxic pesticides. This was out of the blue, and even reading the Spring Economic Statement, you would have had no foretelling of what was in C-30, which was then the programming motions again. Time allocation is one thing in debate. Bear in mind, they brought in time allocation on C-30 after 3 hours of debate in the House, only 3 hours. Yeah. And then they brought in time allocation, and then they threw it to the Finance Committee. And then, no doubt, there was a filibuster by Conservatives that extended the time in Finance Committee. I had to sit through all of it because I had amendments waiting to go to try to have them heard and taken seriously by the Liberals on the committee, who were, of course, the decision makers, because I had support from the Bloc. Now, obviously, the Conservatives didn't support my amendments to try to stop the destruction of our pesticide protections. It's just to say, JP, this is the worst. So it could get worse again with the next government. But if the powers of a Prime Minister are continually expanded, and the grabbing of power to be able to say, we're going to, what was in the discussion papers that they haven't yet implemented as legislation, we're commenting over the summer on discussion documents for May 8th that say such things as we can start building a project before an environmental review is over. These are appalling proposals. We can get rid of an endangered species if it's in the way of a pipeline. Appalling. But what happened with Bill C-30, what happened with C-22, for that matter C-9, pushed through despite widespread opposition and from experts, not partisan, but when you have expressions of real concern from as broad a range of groups as the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment and farming groups, you should be listening.
Although they were elected to get things done quickly, weren't they? I mean, that was the whole MO of their last election campaign, and I guess that's what we're seeing play out in Parliament.
Well, we're seeing Mark Zuckerberg move fast and break things, combined with Steve Bannon flood the zone. They were elected to have elbows up to make sure that we were a sovereign nation and could take on Trump. And I want to be on Team Canada 100% of the way with our Prime Minister on those things. But a lot of what's being done did not come out of the Liberal platform. The things they're moving fast and accomplishing came out of Poilievre's platform. Getting rid of climate action, moving fast, getting rid of reducing our overseas development assistance, reducing it dramatically. When the Liberal platform said we wouldn't cut it, the Conservative platform said we'll cut it. What happened? The Conservative platform.
The Liberals would dispute the idea they're getting rid of climate action, but I take your point that they are certainly more friendly to the energy sector than the last Liberal government. Let's leave it there. I gotta let you go.
They're unfriendly to protecting our future, and that's why the experts on the Net Zero Advisory Panel quit. That's why we questioned them in the Environment Committee, and they said they couldn't stay because it was no longer possible to reach our Paris targets. This is not about friendly or unfriendly to the energy sector. This is about keeping your promises, and they are in international treaties that we have committed to as a nation.
Let's leave it there. Thank you so much. Green Party leader Elizabeth May. Always nice to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, JP.